There is a sentence that millions of people say every single day. Short, simple, almost automatic. I'm fine. Someone asks how you are. You smile. You nod. You tell them everything is okay. And then you keep going. You meet your deadlines. You show up on time. You keep being the version of yourself that everyone expects. And no one notices what's actually happening inside. No one sees the weight you carry into every room. No one knows about the nights you lie awake with thoughts you can't quite name. No one knows that sometimes, in the middle of a perfectly ordinary day, you feel completely hollow. From the outside, you look fine. From the inside, that's not exactly the truth. And here is where it gets dangerous. Because many people have lived this way for so long that they no longer recognize it as a mask. It stops being something they wear. It becomes something they are. They forget what it felt like to be honest with themselves. They forget what it felt like to say the words, "I'm not okay today." We live in a world that teaches us how to perform, how to push through, how to be strong. But almost no one teaches us how to actually face what's underneath. Almost no one warns us what happens when we don't. Carl Jung believed that whatever is pushed out of awareness does not vanish. It descends into the unconscious. And from there, quietly, invisibly, it continues to shape your life in ways you cannot see, cannot control, and cannot explain. The emotions you buried, the pain you decided to get over, the parts of yourself you locked away because the world had no space for them. They don't disappear. They wait. And so, people learn to survive by hiding. They smile when they want to cry. They keep moving when they're running on empty. They say everything is fine while something inside them quietly breaks. Over time, they become extraordinarily good at making the entire world believe they're okay. And then, something even stranger happens. They begin to believe it too. The mask no longer feels like a mask. It becomes an identity. And that is precisely where the real danger begins. Because you are no longer just hiding your pain from the world. You are hiding it from yourself. And Jung had a name for what happens next. The question is not why people wear a mask. The real question is, why did they need one in the first place? Because no child is born pretending. No child enters the world believing their real feelings are too much, too loud, too inconvenient for the people around them. That belief is learned. Slowly, quietly, often without anyone meaning to teach it. Perhaps you learned it the first time you cried and were told to stop overreacting. Perhaps you learned it when you were hurting and the room stayed silent. Perhaps you learned it when your anger led to punishment, or when your fear made someone uncomfortable, or when your sadness was met with impatience. The lesson was never spoken out loud, but it was received. Certain parts of me are welcome here. Other parts are not. And so the child does what children do best. They adapt. They study which emotions earn warmth, which ones earn distance, which version of themselves brings love closer, and which version must be hidden away. Carl Jung called this adaptation the persona. The word comes from the masks worn by actors in ancient Greek theater, a face presented to the audience, a role, a carefully constructed character designed for a specific stage. And in many ways, the persona is not the enemy. Without it, we could not function in society. We could not build relationships, hold jobs, or navigate the complex expectations of the world around us. The persona is not the problem. The problem is what happens when the mask becomes more important than the face beneath it. When survival depends on appearing strong. When belonging depends on appearing happy. When love depends on appearing useful. The persona grows stronger. And the authentic self grows quieter. You stop asking, "What do I feel?" and start asking, "What should I feel?" You stop asking, "What do I need?" and start asking, "What do others expect from me?" The shift is subtle, almost invisible, but it changes everything. Because the role becomes so familiar that you forget it is a role. The strong one, the responsible one, the helper, the one who never complains, the one who never breaks, the one who is always okay. People admire you for it. They depend on you. They call it resilience. And every compliment tightens the mask a little more. Until one day, something quietly unsettling becomes impossible to ignore. The world knows your performance, but almost no one knows you. And the most painful part? You may no longer know yourself either. Because every feeling pushed aside, every tear swallowed in private, Every version of yourself you decided the world wasn't ready for. None of it disappeared. It was stored, layered, compressed, carried downward into the parts of the mind that consciousness cannot easily reach. Carl Jung understood something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The psyche does not throw anything away. Whatever the conscious mind rejects does not die. It migrates into something hidden, something patient, something that grows stronger the longer it is denied. Jung called it the shadow, and the shadow has only one agenda: to be seen. Part 3 Nai La Fan Viet, Tot Not Trong 3 Fan. Jong Van de Tim Duok, Cho Dung Riang. Dan Jia Va Ban Nong Cap. The shadow rarely announces its arrival. It does not knock. It does not warn you. It enters through the cracks in your everyday life, through symptoms you almost always misread. Tired, stressed, burned out, difficult, empty. Most people stop there. They name the symptom and move on. But what if these experiences are not random? What if they are not problems to be fixed, but messages to be read? Signals from parts of yourself that have been waiting in silence for far too long. The human psyche can tolerate suppression for a while, but it cannot sustain it forever. And when what has been pushed down finally pushes back, it rarely appears in the form you expect. You do not suddenly remember every feeling you buried. You do not wake up one morning and calmly announce that your shadow has arrived. Instead, it comes indirectly, through the cracks. Perhaps you find yourself reacting to small things with a force that surprises even you. A careless comment, a minor inconvenience, and your response feels larger than the moment deserves. Or perhaps the exhaustion sets in, and it is not the kind that sleep fixes. This is not physical exhaustion. This is soul exhaustion, the kind that comes from maintaining a performance for years, from showing up as someone you constructed rather than someone you actually are. You continue smiling. You continue functioning. But something inside grows increasingly distant, increasingly absent, increasingly numb. Many people mistake this numbness for peace, but they are not the same. Peace feels alive. Numbness feels empty. Peace connects you to life. Numbness disconnects you from it. And from the outside, nothing appears wrong. You may still be achieving, still producing, still carrying everyone else's expectations with quiet efficiency. But inwardly, something essential begins to fade. The sense that your life belongs to you. The sense that your choices are genuinely yours. The sense that you are living, rather than merely performing a life. Carl Jung observed that whatever remains unconscious does not disappear. It continues to shape behavior from beneath the surface. And the longer something is denied, the more forcefully it seeks expression. This is why people sometimes destroy the relationships they most desperately want. Why they withdraw from the people who care about them most. Why they wake up one day and no longer recognize the life they spent years building. The conscious mind says, everything is fine. The unconscious replies, no, it isn't. And eventually, the tension between those two voices becomes impossible to ignore. This is the hidden cost of always being strong. Not weakness. Disconnection. Disconnection from your feelings, from your needs, from your instincts, from yourself. And when that disconnection becomes unbearable, most people look for the exit in the wrong direction. A new relationship, a new city, a new distraction, believing the problem exists somewhere outside of themselves. But Jung believed something that changes everything. He believed the crisis was not a punishment. It was an invitation, a message from the unconscious that something buried was demanding attention. Something forgotten was trying to return. Something real was asking to be acknowledged for the first time in years. And what emerges from that depth is rarely comfortable. Because before you can become who you truly are, you must first be willing to meet the parts of yourself you spent a lifetime trying not to see. That encounter, that is where the real journey begins. Most people imagine the shadow as something dark, something dangerous, something monstrous lurking in the depths. And in a sense, yes. But the shadow is not simply the worst parts of you. It is the forgotten parts of you, the rejected parts, the unlived parts, the feelings, desires, and truths that were quietly pushed out of awareness because, at some point in your life, they seemed unacceptable. Too much, too loud, too inconvenient for the world around you. And the shadow does not remain silent forever. It speaks. The problem is that it rarely speaks in a language we immediately recognize. It does not sit us down and explain what is wrong. It speaks through emotions, through reactions, through patterns that repeat themselves no matter how many times we tell ourselves things will be different. Have you ever met someone and felt an immediate, inexplicable dislike toward them? Not because of anything they actually did, but because something about them bothered you in a way you couldn't quite explain. Perhaps they seemed too arrogant, too emotional, too confident, too needy, too free. Jung believed these intense reactions are rarely just about the other person. They are often about ourselves. Because what we find most intolerable in others frequently mirrors something we have refused to acknowledge within ourselves. The person who expresses anger freely may trigger someone who spent a lifetime suppressing their own rage. The person who lives without apology may disturb someone trapped inside endless obligations. The person who speaks their truth may provoke someone who has spent years in careful silence. The shadow has a peculiar way of appearing in the faces of the people around us, as though life keeps placing mirrors in your path and quietly asking a question you do not want to answer. What part of yourself are you looking at right now? But projection is only one of the shadow's languages. Sometimes it speaks through self-sabotage. You finally get close to something you genuinely want, a relationship that feels real, an opportunity that could change everything, a moment where you might finally be seen. And then something inside pulls back. You procrastinate. You withdraw. You find reasons it won't work before it has the chance to fail. Not because you don't want it, but because some hidden part of you has learned that wanting things is dangerous. That happiness doesn't last. That visibility invites hurt. That love eventually leaves. The conscious mind moves toward life. The shadow pulls toward familiar survival patterns. And the tension between them creates a suffering that is very difficult to explain to anyone who hasn't felt it. Other times, the shadow arrives as numbness. Not sadness, not grief, not anything you can point to and name. Just absence, a strange disconnection from your own life, as though you are watching yourself from a distance. Many people spend years trying to escape this feeling, but Jung would ask a different question entirely. Not, how do I get rid of this? But, what part of your soul have you lost contact with? Because numbness is rarely the absence of feeling. It is the absence of permission to feel. And eventually, the shadow grows tired of waiting. It begins pressing harder. What began as mild restlessness becomes anxiety. What began as anxiety becomes exhaustion. What began as exhaustion becomes a crisis that can no longer be explained away. Not because the psyche wants to destroy you, because it wants to wake you up. This is one of Jung's most profound and least understood insights. The unconscious does not seek your suffering. It seeks your wholeness. And sometimes the only path toward wholeness runs directly through everything you spent years trying to avoid. The grief you never let yourself feel. The anger you decided was too dangerous. The loneliness you covered with constant motion. The version of yourself you abandoned because the world didn't seem to have room for it. The shadow is not your enemy. The shadow is the messenger. And the message, beneath all the chaos, the numbness, the self-sabotage, the inexplicable reactions, is always the same. There is more to you than the person you have been performing. There is more to you than the mask. The only question that remains is whether you are willing to look. There is a moment that arrives in many people's lives. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Gradually. Quietly. Almost imperceptibly. Until one day, in the middle of an ordinary moment, a question surfaces that is far more frightening than it should be. Who am I? Not who others believe I am. Not who I have been trying to be. Not the role. Not the performance. Not the mask. Me. The actual me. And for many people, the answer does not come. Only silence. Because after years of adapting to survive, after years of becoming what others needed, after years of suppressing inconvenient emotions and unwanted truths, the connection to the authentic self becomes increasingly difficult to locate. You know how to meet expectations. You know how to fulfill responsibilities. You know how to be useful. But when no one is asking anything of you, when the room falls quiet, when the distractions disappear, you are left alone with a question you cannot easily answer. What do I actually want? Many people discover, to their quiet horror, that they have no idea. Not because something is wrong with them, but because they have spent so long responding to the outside world that they forgot how to listen inward. Carl Jung believed this crisis is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that the old identity has become too small. The persona that once protected you, the role, the performance, the carefully constructed self, has carried you this far. But it cannot carry you further. The mask still functions, but it no longer feels alive. And this creates one of the strangest experiences a person can have. You achieve something you once desperately wanted, and feel nothing. You reach a destination you spent years pursuing, and discover it does not satisfy you. You look around at the life you carefully built, and wonder, in a way you dare not say out loud, why does this feel like someone else's life? This is often the moment people decide to change everything. A new relationship, a new career, a new city, a new beginning. And sometimes, those changes are exactly what is needed. But often, the deeper issue lies elsewhere. Because wherever you go, you take yourself with you. The unresolved parts, the hidden fears, the abandoned desires, the grief that was never allowed to exist. All of it travels with you. Into the new relationship, into the new city, into the new beginning, until the same patterns emerge again, and the same emptiness returns, and the question resurfaces. Why can't I just be okay? Jung understood that the greatest loss a person can experience is not losing a relationship, not losing status, not losing success. The greatest loss is losing contact with your own soul. Because once that connection fades, even achievement feels hollow. Even love feels distant. Even a life that looks perfect from the outside can feel like a performance with no audience worth playing for. This is the silent suffering of people who appear to have everything. They mastered the art of becoming someone. But somewhere along the way, they forgot how to simply be themselves. And eventually, life stops asking for more performance. It begins asking for something else entirely. Truth. The truth about what you feel. The truth about what you fear. The truth about what you have quietly desired for years but never allowed yourself to pursue. The truth about who you became in order to be accepted. And perhaps most painfully, the truth about who you abandoned in order to survive. Because the path back to yourself does not begin with reinvention. It begins with remembrance. Remembering the person you were before fear taught you to hide, before pain taught you to perform, before survival became your entire identity. Jung believed that healing is not the process of creating a new self. It is the process of recovering the one that was lost, of bringing what is unconscious into awareness, of reclaiming what was rejected, of becoming, for the first time, perhaps, genuinely whole. And that journey has a name. Jung called it individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are. Not who you were told to be, not who you learned to perform, but who you actually are. And it does not begin with a dramatic transformation. It begins with a single, quiet act of honesty. Admitting that the person you have been showing the world is not the whole story. That somewhere beneath the mask, you are still there, waiting. If you have been suffering for a long time, you are probably carrying a very simple question somewhere inside you. How do I stop feeling this way? How do I stop being exhausted? How do I stop feeling so disconnected from my own life? How do I finally, genuinely, become okay? These are understandable questions. But Carl Jung would likely respond with something unexpected. Not an answer. Another question. Not, how do you get rid of these feelings? But, what are these feelings trying to tell you? This is where the Jungian path diverges from almost everything else. Most approaches to suffering ask, how do we make this stop? Jung asked, what does this suffering know that you don't? Because the goal of psychological growth is not to eliminate every uncomfortable emotion. The goal is to understand what those emotions are pointing toward. And this is precisely where many people become trapped for years. They fight symptoms. They try to silence anxiety, suppress sadness, outrun loneliness, fill the emptiness with motion. And yet, the more they fight, the more exhausting the battle becomes. Because what demands to be heard does not disappear when you refuse to listen. It only grows louder. Jung believed that healing begins the moment you stop running, the moment you turn around, and face what has been following you all along. The grief that was never allowed to exist, the anger that had nowhere safe to go, the fear you convinced yourself was weakness, the needs you decided made you too much, the parts of yourself you quietly abandoned in exchange for acceptance. This is not easy work. It may be the most difficult thing a person can do, because it requires a specific kind of honesty. Not honesty with other people, honesty with yourself. The kind that asks, in the silence of a moment no one else can see, what am I pretending not to know? What am I afraid to admit? What part of my life no longer feels true? These questions are uncomfortable, but every honest answer brings you closer to yourself. Jung called this movement individuation, the lifelong journey toward wholeness. And there is a distinction worth pausing on. Perfection demands that parts of you be removed. Wholeness asks that all parts of you be acknowledged, not fixed, not eliminated, not hidden away, acknowledged. Even the wounded parts, even the frightened parts, even the parts you spent years convincing yourself were unacceptable. The goal was never to become a better mask. The goal is to become a more complete human being, to stop dividing yourself into the parts that are allowed to exist and the parts that must remain hidden, to stop treating your own inner world as though it were an enemy to be defeated. Because here is what Jung discovered. Every rejected part of you carries energy. And when those parts are finally brought into awareness, when they are finally met with honesty rather than suppression, something shifts. The energy once spent keeping them hidden becomes available for something else. For creativity, for genuine connection, for meaning, for the kind of aliveness that no achievement has ever been able to manufacture. This is why the journey back to yourself is not about adding something new. It is about recovering something that was always there, something that existed before the mask was built, before the performance began, before survival became the only mode you knew. Your authentic self, not perfect, not invulnerable, not endlessly strong, but real. And perhaps that is what so many people who have suffered quietly for too long are truly searching for. Not happiness exactly, not success, not even peace in the conventional sense. Reality, a life that feels honest, a life that genuinely belongs to them, a life in which they no longer have to perform in order to be worthy of existing. Because healing does not begin when the pain disappears. Healing begins when the performance ends. When you stop asking, how do I become someone else? And begin asking, who am I beneath everything I had to become? That question changes everything. Not immediately, not without difficulty, not without the discomfort of meeting parts of yourself you have long avoided. But if you stay with it, if you are willing to look honestly at what has been hidden, if you are willing to extend the same compassion toward yourself that you have spent years offering everyone else, that question will not leave you where it found you. It may, if you let it, lead you home. Perhaps the most tragic thing about suffering is not the pain itself. It is how convincingly pain teaches us to hide, to smile when we are struggling, to perform when we are exhausted, to become what is expected rather than who we actually are. And after enough years, the performance becomes automatic. A question, a familiar answer, a smile that arrives before the feeling does. How are you? I'm fine. But perhaps those words sound different to you now, because you understand something that most people spend their entire lives not realizing. The mask was never the enemy. The mask helped you survive. It carried you through years when you had no other way through. It protected you when vulnerability felt too dangerous. It allowed you to keep moving when stopping felt impossible. There is no shame in that. The persona was not a failure. It was an adaptation, a response to pain, a response to fear, a response to the specific conditions of your life, conditions you did not choose and could not control. It served you, and it is allowed to have served you. But survival is not the same as living. And eventually, every human being arrives at a crossroads, to continue performing, or to begin becoming, to keep repeating the identity that once kept them safe, or to discover, slowly, imperfectly, with great difficulty, the person waiting beneath it. Carl Jung believed that the greatest privilege a human being can experience is to become who they truly are. Not who others expect, not who fear demands, not who survival created out of necessity, but who they actually are. Whole, conscious, alive in a way that no performance can replicate. This does not happen in a single moment. It does not arrive as a revelation. It does not come from a new relationship or a new city or a new beginning. It happens slowly, through honesty, through awareness, through the quiet, ongoing courage to face what has been hidden, not all at once, but gradually, one layer at a time. And perhaps that journey begins with something far simpler than you expected. Not transforming your entire life, not having all the answers, not becoming fearless, just telling yourself the truth. Maybe for the first time in a very long time. Maybe today, the truth that exists beneath the mask, the truth beneath the performance, the truth beneath the words you have said so many times they stopped feeling like words at all. I'm fine. And if, when you sit quietly with yourself, the honest answer is, no, I'm not. That is not weakness. That is not failure. That is not falling apart. That is awareness. And awareness, not happiness, not success, not the absence of pain, is where every real transformation begins. Because when someone has suffered for too long, they learn to hide with extraordinary skill. But healing does not begin with feeling better. Healing begins with being honest. The moment you stop hiding from yourself, the moment the performance, even just for a moment, even just alone in a quiet room, finally ends. The moment you turn toward the person you have been carrying all along, the person who survived everything that tried to erase them, the person who adapted when adaptation was the only option, the person who wore the mask because they had to, the person who survived, the person who never truly disappeared, and who is still there, waiting beneath it. You were never meant to lose yourself, and it is not too late to find your way back.